Hello, this is Mr. Red Fox, and this is a pre-made video. I'm recording this Thursday, February 13th, so this will be uploaded February 15th, day after Valentine's Day. So that being said, let's get to it. This video is just going to be me talking about some games that I used to love that, because of certain attitudes and things that have happened with those games being published, I essentially cannot continue to support these games anymore. So with that being said, let's get to it after the cut. So the first game I'm going to talk about is Final Fantasy. Now, I used to love this franchise. And when I say I loved Final Fantasy, I mean like anything Final Fantasy I bought. Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles, Final Fantasy Legend, Final Fantasy Saga, Final Fantasy Legend on the Game Boy, which is actually a Saga. It's a Saga game. It's not a Final Fantasy game, but I played it and enjoyed it for what it was. So, I used to love this franchise ever since I first played it when I was a little kid, and I loved Final Fantasy. And then Hironobu Sakaguchi left Square Enix, and Final Fantasy went to shit. Not in one fell swoop. It was gradual. We got Final Fantasy X-2, which is terrible. And then we got Final Fantasy Final Fantasy 12, which is actually pretty good until you realize it's not a Final Fantasy game. Like, it's not even a little bit a Final Fantasy game. Like, there's nothing Final Fantasy like about Final Fantasy 12. Aside from, which is okay because it's a Final Fantasy Tactics RPG, which I'm alright with. The problem, however, is that, it's like, I don't, like, when I play Final Fantasy, I play Final Fantasy for a very distinct reason. Like, Final Fantasy scratches a particular itch, and, if you're not scratching that itch, then what's the point? It's like, for me, playing a Final Fantasy game, when I was younger, when Final Fantasy was good, in my opinion, was essentially kind of like going to, it was like going to a French restaurant that specialized in, traditional French cuisine. I go there because I want a particular dish, you know what I mean? That's basically how Square Enix just kind of fucked up, because, Final Fantasy is not a consistent product. And the thing is, everyone's like, well, video games are this, that, and the other. Video games are a product, okay? I don't consider them to be a work of art. They are a product, which means you have to have consistency, et cetera, et cetera. Like, no one would buy a car model if every single version of the vehicle that came out was drastically different every time. Like, no one would do that shit, and yet that's essentially what we get from Final Fantasy. Every single console generation, every Final Fantasy is very inconsistent with the quality of the title, which is not good. I mean, no one else would, it's not acceptable to have a product. Like, would you go to a restaurant where every hamburger, there was no consistency? Now, I don't mean every Final Fantasy needs to be the same, but, I mean, this is Final Fantasy. This is like a marquee title, and yet everyone is basically like, their own marquee title. They're like, well, it is what it is. Unacceptable. So, with that being said, so I went from loving Final Fantasy to now I'm just very pessimistic about the whole damn thing. Like, I don't think Final Fantasy can be good anymore. The last good Final Fantasy I played was Final Fantasy X. And like I said, Final Fantasy 12, I don't really consider to be a Final Fantasy game. It's a Final Fantasy Tactics game. But, Final Fantasy Tactics I enjoyed, but it scratches a completely different itch than a typical Final Fantasy game. And that's okay. So, used to love it, don't love it anymore. So next I'll go over a franchise I used to love and don't anymore. After the cut. So, I used to love Pokemon back in the day, way back in the day. Like when it first began, I was into Pokemon. Now, not so much. Now I'm kind of like, eh. Mostly because, I mean, Pokemon has pretty much not really gotten any better in my opinion. It's just basically the same shit over and over and over again. And I know some people say, well, the core gameplay is the same. There's another franchise where the core gameplay stayed the same, but there's enough of a variation between the titles that it doesn't feel stagnant. Dragon Quest. But as far as Pokemon goes, it's very much like it feels so static and so samey, and the Pokemon feel so unimaginative these days that I just find myself not really giving a shit about the IP. And I know some people are going to disagree, and that's their prerogative, but it's too stale and stagnant for me. The stagnation of the series just kind of ruins it for me. And I know some people say, well, they went 3D. That's not... Making something 3D and essentially having everything else stay the same is not something new. Is not making it new. That's just changing the viewpoint. Like a Mario game, even with the 3D jump, like the Legend of Zelda games, even with the jump into 3D, were essentially the same types of games. Nothing drastically changed because they went to 3D. Just the perspectives of what you were doing changed, and that's okay. I don't have anything against that on the face of it, but I just wish that Legend of Zelda games are this epic gaming experience. The real draw is, the dungeons and the dungeon design, the puzzle design. That's the draw of the Legend of Zelda game. Now, Pokemon, the real draw is the different Pokemon, the new Pokemon, the gameplay systems they add. But, I mean, that's the thing. Like, the core gameplay of, you have a team of Pokemon, you catch Pokemon, that gameplay loop is there. And that's okay, but if you're just gonna, like have unimaginative Pokemon, like a fucking, popsicle, ice cream, a scoop of ice cream as a Pokemon, that's just fucking stupid. I'm sorry. That is, that's dumb. And I know some people will be like, but look, that's unfucking imaginative. And don't tell me it isn't, because it is. That is totally unimaginative, and I don't want to hear, oh, well, that's just, it's not. It is, okay? We should have known something was up when they had the Pokemon that was just a bag of trash. Like, it's not even tongue-in-cheek anymore. Like, when you had a shit monster, Muck and Grimer and Muck, okay, it's a shit monster. Okay, cool. But when you start going to, like monsters where it's like, okay, this is just, that was cool once. It's not cool anymore because it's just unimaginative at this point. And that's what it feels like. So, with that being said, I'll get to my third game, which is going to be kind of a shocker. Game that I used to like, but not anymore. So, after the cut. So, I used to like Castlevania. I kind of don't like it anymore. Mostly because there hasn't been a good Castlevania in years, in my opinion. Like, the last good Castlevania game I played was Aria of Sorrow on the Game Boy, on the GBA. Like, that's the last good Castlevania game I played. And, that's a very slim margin, if you get my drift. That's a very small, that's a very small library of, that was a long time ago. I didn't really like Dawn of Sorrow or, Order of Ecclesia. Portrait of Ruin was okay, but it wasn't like, oh, this is the best game ever. I think Koji Igarashi's overall quality of Castlevanias it's hit or miss in my opinion. I don't think it's the best. I don't think it's the worst, but it's definitely not like, oh my god, this has changed my life type of thing. It's like, it's okay. So, yeah. Castlevania, don't get me started on the 3D Castlevanias. Most of the 3D Castlevanias made by Konami were shit. If you want a 3D Castlevania game, go play Darksiders 1 or 2. Those are much better 3D Castlevania games than anything made by Konami or, Mercury Steam or any of those fuckers. So that being said, those are my 3 franchises I used to love, don't anymore due to, them stagnating or just not making good games anymore. So that being said, we'll get to the wrap up after the cut, and then we'll bring it home. So, this is the wrap-up. So, these were just 3 games that, or should I say game franchises that I used to love, but, now I'm kind of like on the opposite end of that spectrum with. You might even say I hate them now. So, with that being said, that's the end of this video. We will be back to our normally regularly scheduled programming next week, starting with February 19th. So that'll be Wednesday, and we'll have our next podcast on the 22nd. So we'll be back to our normal scheduled programming next week. I'll leave a link in the description to our latest podcast, BS Busters. And stay tuned next week with our next, unsung Black History heroes. I'm waffling between Reggie Fils-Aimé and someone else, because Reggie Fils-Aimé is really kind of well known. So, I might go with someone more, on the cusp. So with that being said, that's the end of the video. Peace and good night.